Now on Conversations with Maine, medical pioneer, peace advocate, and Nobel laureate Dr. Bernard Lown talks about growing up in Maine, connecting global cultures, and his hopes for world peace.
The essence of medicine is addressing a human being. A human being is more than a heart, a lung, an organ that is dysfunctional. A human being is a mind, a soul, a presence.
And now, Conversations with Maine host, Frank Ferrel.
I'm standing here on the Old South Bridge. It connects Lewiston and Auburn, and soon it's going to be renamed the Bernard Lown Peace Bridge. Now, who, you may ask, is Bernard Lown? Well, for starters, he's a graduate of Lewiston High School and the University of Maine. He went on to medical school, and as a cardiologist invented the defibrillator. As a social activist, he founded Physicians for Social Responsibility and the International Physicians for the Prevention of Nuclear War. He won the Nobel Peace Prize and is a best-selling medical author. And at 89, an age when most doctors have long since retired, he's still training fellows at the Lown Cardiovascular Research Foundation near Boston. All reason enough for a conversation and a hometown bridge named in his honor. So you have been involved in medicine. You've been described as a medical pioneer, but you're also a very socially active and globally socially active advocate for peace.
Well, I think they are not separate. I think if you care for a person as a patient, you must care for the survival of humankind. And if you want to heal an individual, you immediately realize that the process of healing is not merely attending to a murmur, to a nerve ache. It's attending to a whole host of factors, a social environment, psychological factors. The most common cause of disease in the world today is poverty. So how can you be a doctor and be indifferent to poverty?
I remember from a conversation we had earlier, you talked about the fact that you were radicalized in Lewiston, Maine. Tell me about that.
You're reminding me of something that happened, you know how long ago? 73 years ago. In 1935, 36, I was getting an allowance of about 50 cents a week or something like that. My father, who was in the shoe business, asked me if I wanted to work in the factory. And
this was Lown Shoes.
Yeah, and they would pay me $15 a week. $15 was being a Rockefeller, you know. $15. So I went to work, and as I was walking, I saw pickets with signs, and the people walking who were strike breaking were big goons, you know, big guys who were brought in from somewhere.
And you were just a teenager.
I was 14 or 15 years old, and I was walking, and somebody yelled out, "Scab!" And this fellow turned around and punched the short Frenchman in the nose, and he became bloodied and fell into the ground, into the snow. And a policeman came and arrested him, arrested the guy who was just punched. And I was so mortified, so angered, so incensed that I began to study what was happening. And I became an avid supporter of the striking workers against my father and uncle.
This was the shoe strike.
Yeah, the shoe strike.
Yeah.
And of course, it created enormous friction between me and my father. After a while, we couldn't eat together. And that opened up a universe of possibility because I wasn't confined. I began to understand class issues, social issues, eventually racial issues, and eventually peace issues.
And you went from graduating at Lewiston High School
Yes.
to University of Maine.
Yes.
Which you talk very fondly about.
I do because it started me on a different journey. It exposed me to a whole vast array of philosophy, culture, literature, and science. I majored in genetics at that time, and I raised about 70,000 little fruit flies. I'll never forget that.
And from University of Maine, we fast forward to Johns Hopkins, where you studied medicine and really began to do some research.
I began to do some research shortly after I graduated medical school, and basically I oriented to why people die suddenly when they get mercurial diuretics, which were then given to mobilize water from the body. And I discovered that it was due to the loss of potassium. That was totally new. So I was a young whippersnapper, and I wanted to go to the place where I could prove the thesis. And that was the Peter Ben Brigham Hospital, one of the Harvard hospitals in Boston. So that's where I came, and I applied to work with Dr. Levine, who was the great cardiologist.
In your first book, The Lost Art of Healing, you mention him a lot, and you refer to him often and his wisdom and the way he trained.
He made a doctor out of me. I was a wise Alec. I was naive. Thought I was very bright. I thought I could do anything. And after a year with him, rounding with him, I knew all his stories. I was bored silly hearing them again. And I stopped and I began to see patients. And I realized I was a clod. Levine would give advice and the patient got better. I'd give advice and the patient got worse, not better. So I went back. I pride myself on that. I went back and was his fellow for 10 years.
For 10 years?
For 10 years I rounded with him and heard the same darn stories 1,000 times.
What was he doing that was so...
He was doing something magical. He was engaging in the art of healing. He was engaging and encompassing the whole person. He had intuitive understanding. And it always put his hand on the shoulder of a patient and says, "You're going to get better."
And in your book, you talk a lot about the importance of that, of physical contact.
Yes. The moment you contact another human being, you break down enormous barriers that always separates and create our personal identities that are essentially exclusive. You are different. You're a potential enemy. You're a potential hostile. But the moment you touch, the reason I know that, I take a history. A person would tell me this, that. Then I'd go in the physical examination. I'd touch them, and I'd ask them again, now, something new, something deep poured out. And many a patient would tell me, "Doctor, what I'm telling you, not even my husband knows." Or what I'm telling you, not even my psychiatrist knows.
Was there some seminal moment in your youth when you decided medicine was your pursuit?
In Lewiston, Maine, there was a refugee doctor from Germany, Dr. Hirschler. And he once invited me to his house for tea. And they were listening to Vivaldi music, which I'd never heard. And they were talking of 15th century Renaissance poetry, and they were sweeping along in Italian and French and German and English. And the conversation was so scintillating, so exciting. I say, doctors are the most cultured people in the world. I want to be a doctor. Turned out not to be the case, but that started me.
Now, at some point, and I was reading in your Prescription for Survival, that you were pretty much set on a course of discovery in medicine, and there was a moment when you really became aware of the need to broaden your thoughts in terms of nuclear threat. And
it happened again. These little coincidences in life that change the course of your traverse in life. It was 1961 when somebody asked me to come along to listen to a Britisher talk about nuclear war, and I wasn't at all interested. I was concerned with sudden cardiac death, the leading cause of fatality in the United States, more people dying from it than all cancers combined. And I was working away. That's the way I developed the defibrillator, the cardioverter, introduced lidocaine, coronary care, a whole host of things. But I went, and he was Sir Philip Noel Baker, who had just won the Nobel Peace Prize. Look at the coincidences. And I listened to him, and he intoned like an ancient Hebraic prophet about the fact there won't be a world in the year 2000, 40 years away, because the nuclear arms race is a house of matches. It's going to topple. When it topples, human life will end. And I was in a state of shock. Here I was working on sudden cardiac death, but the threat to humankind was sudden nuclear death. What can I do about it? So in this very room, I called together some young colleagues from around Harvard hospitals, and we met here every 2 weeks, and we explored what were the consequences of nuclear war, a nuclear attack on Boston. And we found out some of the facts that were so awesome, beyond belief. Out of Boston's 3 million people, 2 million would be instantly killed. 500,000 would be mortally injured. Only 1,000 doctors would remain alive. And we figured that medicine had nothing to offer in case of nuclear war. Prevention of the final epidemic was what we ought to do. We were called before Congress to testify. And all over the world, they began to imitate our example, because they could now bomb Pittsburgh, use the same model, bomb Dresden, bomb Berlin, bomb Amsterdam. All over the world, they began to do it. And here is where we founded the Physicians for Social Responsibility.
And also, wasn't this kind of the seed that got planted for the next organization?
Exactly. The next organization occurs 20 years later. 20 years later, by this time, I had bowed out of it. I thought the world will take a more intelligent turn. And yet the nuclear arms race was getting worse. By the time 1980 arrived, we had 16,000 megatons. 16,000 megatons, 11 megatons were what was the ordnance dropped during World War II. In Japan, in Germany, all over the world, 11 megatons. We and the Russians had 16,000. We could kill every single living person 20 times, We had a capacity to incinerate the Soviet Union.
I was going to ask you at some point in our conversation what topics were you passionate about? I think I just found out.
Yes. Well, do you think it's wrong to be passionate about human survival on this planet?
Well, that's the point, because I know that you co-founded the Physicians Against the Proliferation of Nuclear Arms with a Soviet cardiologist. And this created quite a bit of anxiety, if you will.
You're being very kind. Anxiety. More than anxiety. We were attacked. Firstly, I met this Soviet doctor because I was interested in sudden cardiac death. I was in New Delhi in 1966, a World Congress. I'm in an elevator, and there I see a nicely attired young fellow coming up, and I looked down his shoes. They were stodgy and coarse. I say, he must be a Russian. So I said to him,
back to shoes.
Yeah. I said, are you a Russian? He says, da, yes. What's your name? He says, Yevgeny Chazov, Eugene Chazov. He wasn't just any Russian. He was the leading cardiologist. He was Brezhnev's doctor. Wow. And he was the doctor to most of the Politburo.
And then you had a shared passion for trying to put an end to the proliferation of nuclear arms.
Then in 1978, I wrote to Chazov, because by now we were friends. We got to work together. Because what impelled me in that direction is anybody I talk about nuclear issue would checkmate me with 5 words. I agree with you, Lown, but you can't trust the Russians. You can't trust the Russians. The Russians were stereotyped as subhuman. Communist, atheist, the evil empire, terrorist. You can't deal with them. Anybody who deals with them is a traitor, a KGB dupe. That's what I was called, But so I say, we doctors who share values, who share tradition, who share language, who share goals, we can show the rest of humanity that we must live together. We either live together or die together. There's no other option.
Now, you and Dr. Chazov founded this organization. It became widely attended by other physicians. I think 150,000 other physicians around the world joined in, and this is what led to the, ironically, the Nobel Peace Prize.
Yes.
And your first introduction was through listening to a Nobel laureate, and now you are one. And I understand that even the awarding of the prize was not greeted with a lot of pleasure on the part of the U.S.
The Senate passed a resolution asking the Nobel Committee to rescind the prize.
So back then it was dealing with Russia.
Dealing with communists. Dealing with communists. I was doing something that was improper, incorrect, un-American.
I want to bring healthcare and your concern for mankind back home, if we can, for a moment. I'm wondering what your take on healthcare is today.
Dear Frank, you're starting a discussion that will take us a week. Healthcare is community-based. It's prevention. It's orienting to making sure that people live healthy lives. If you encourage people to walk, if you took away Coke machines and other things like that, if you begin to educate kids on healthy living, if you gave premiums for healthy living, if you controlled high blood pressure, if you controlled obesity, if you encouraged exercise, if you developed less stress in society by doing away with poverty so everybody had to work 2-3 jobs, if you did away with the crazy notion that you have to accumulate this or that. Americans are commodified nuts. Commodified nuts. I have to get the latest iPod. I have to get the latest. Why? Life is about being, not possessing. You know? And the moment you begin to possess, what happens to you? You become an object. You're no longer a human being. You're an object. Because what makes life vibrant, interesting, exciting, worth living is to be socially engaged. Socially engaged means you and me are partners. We interact. We build a better world. And a better world is possible.
What is your health package advice then for the average American?
The average American needs to set limits about possessing, acquiring, taking a walk in the woods of Maine, being on a boat in the marvelous lakes of Maine, you know, talking to his wife or his partner, developing the art of conversation. There's such deep satisfaction. Reading a book, we're giving up on that. That would be my medical advice.
Everything you've said so far has nothing to do with medication or hospital visits or doctor visits?
That's the point. You have lost the essence of medicine. The essence of medicine is addressing a human being. A human being is more than a heart, a lung, an organ that is dysfunctional. A human being is a mind, a soul, a presence. And that you can't address with drugs and surgery.
You're holding your newest book, Prescription for Survival. And I'm wondering if you can summarize what your prescription for survival is in this modern age.
Well, I think several things. Firstly and foremost, bring justice to the developing world. The world is cleaved in two, the rich world and the poor world. Such a world is unsurvivable in the long run. Already 20 years ago, I began to talk about terrorism. Terrorism is the expression of rage and hopelessness of people who live in a world that is transparent, live in a world that is constantly beckoning with abundance, live in a world which science makes possible, really, that everybody have a full life, at least the essentials, food, shelter, health. The moment you provide health, you provide social stability. And the moment you have social stability, you undermine terrorism. So that would be number one. Number two, I think we should right now address the question of climate, which is absolutely essential, because the climatic global warming will aggravate the first problem. Namely, the people hit worst will be the poor people who live in tropical parts and islands. So this is a second urgent problem. A third, and I'm not giving it in the priority if I had a chance to think of it, get rid of nuclear weapons. Because nuclear weapons are weapons of terrorism, of genocide. I saw it in Russia. They regard nuclear weapons as making them into a great power. This is a sickness. We got to get rid of nuclear weapons. No ifs, buts. Abolition is the only course. Abolition is the only course. If we don't, we probably don't deserve to be alive.
I'm sitting here and I'm seeing this image of Dr. Bernard Lown holding this book, which I sense was a real labor of love. It took a long time, as you said, to put it together, but the passion with which you're talking about your ideas, all contained in that book, must be a real...
A labor of love, I wouldn't call it. The reason it was a labor of necessity, a labor of duty, a labor of conscience, because this was the hardest project I've undertaken in my life. It was more difficult than developing any of the medical advances, defibrillator, whatever. And when I reflect on it, if Americans read it and take the lessons to heart, it'll save more lives than all my inventions.
Growing up in Lewiston, Maine, did you ever think that all of this would have ever happened in your lifetime?
That's what makes life so wonderful. It's unpredictability. Yeah. It can happen to anyone. Anyone who opens his eyes and opens his arms to embrace life at the fullest, who's not afraid. You see, most people live petty lives because they're afraid. They're afraid that they'll be criticized. They're afraid to be wrong. I want to be wrong, because from my being wrong, I learn how to be right. Every day I come back at night when I see patients, I'd say, Lown, what stupid mistake did you make today? I'd have sort of a little soliloquy. And I shouldn't have done that, I shouldn't have done that. And I also want to learn from the mistakes of others, because I couldn't possibly live long enough to make them all myself.
Soon you're going to be standing in front of the old South Bridge that connects Lewiston and Auburn to accept the dedication of that bridge in your name.
That came as a great surprise, and in a way it's symbolic of my life. Symbolic in the sense that my aim was always to connect. Mm-hmm. To connect human beings with one another, the patient with the doctor with the patient, the Soviet with the American, the poor world with the rich world, to create that connection, to create bridges. So it's, in a way, again, emblematic of what my life was all about.
And when you take a walk across that bridge, it will be for the little French picketer, it'll be for your Soviet partner.
Yes.
It will be for the patients, it'll be for my
wife Louise, who really is the hidden hero behind this whole story, because without her, nothing would have happened. And I begin the book by dedicating it to two people, to my wife Louise, without whom this journey would have been inconceivable, to my friend Eugene Chazov, without whom the journey would have been impossible.
Well, this morning has been a wonderful journey with you, and I really appreciate your sharing your ideas and thoughts with us, and thank you.
Thank you. We must hold fast to the dream that reason will prevail. Great as the danger is, still greater is the opportunity. Only those who see the invisible can do the impossible.